London, winter of 1853, with a fog clung to the cobblestones like shame itself. The Whitcomb Winter Ball glittered beneath chandeliers, each crystal reflecting 1,000 judgments. The great families of Mayfair arrived draped in satin, pearls, and pretense, whispering names as though each syllable could wound. And among them, Lady Eleanor Whitcomb descended the marble staircase, every eye upon her for all the wrong reasons. Once she had been the jewel of every season, graceful, witty, admired. Now she was the subject of hushed pity and scandal. The barren beauty, they called her, a phrase that passed between fans and champagne glasses like poison. She moved through the crowd with quiet poise, her gloved hands folded before her, her pale blue gown trembling faintly with each breath. A musician plucked the first notes of a waltz, and a few brave souls pretended not to stare. Her mother, Lady Whitcomb, swept behind her like a general leading a doomed regiment, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Her father lingered near the punch bowl, speaking in low tones to men who smiled too eagerly. Debt had carved new lines into his face. The Whitcomb fortune had long since drained away, and Eleanor's failed engagement had closed the final door. Across the ballroom, laughter rippled as someone whispered her name. Eleanor's throat tightened. Only 6 months ago, she had been promised to Lord Ashbury, a match that would have restored her family's place among the gentry. But a physician's whispered confidence that she might never bear a child had been enough to shatter the arrangement. The engagement was ended within a week. Invitations vanished. Friends withdrew. Even the servants had begun to pity her. Her mother's hand clutched her arm suddenly, fingers pressing through silk. "Smile," Lady Whitcomb hissed. "A woman does not weep in public. You will make conversation. You will not disgrace us further." Eleanor obeyed, her lips curving into a fragile imitation of joy. Inside, her thoughts spun in quiet revolt. She wished for air, for space, for something beyond the suffocating walls of propriety. But the only escape lay in the garden beyond the tall windows, where frost covered every rose like a burial shroud. A voice interrupted her despair. Lady Whitcomb. It belonged to a man neither young nor old, his posture impeccable, his eyes a storm beneath the light. The Duke of Wycliffe, Adrian Wycliffe, stood before them, his black coat fitted perfectly, his demeanor unreadable. The crowd stilled. His presence always drew silence. Some claimed he had buried 2 wives, others that he preferred solitude to society. Whatever the truth, his fortune was vast and his reputation formidable. Lady Whitcomb's curtsy was deep, almost reverent. "Your Grace honors us," she said, her tone honeyed with relief. Eleanor saw it instantly, the glint of calculation in her mother's eyes. The Duke's gaze drifted to Eleanor, studying her not with desire, but with something quieter, heavier, perhaps recognition of pain. He bowed slightly. "Lady Eleanor." She curtsied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Your Grace." For a heartbeat, the orchestra and chatter seemed to fade. The Duke regarded her, as though weighing something unseen. Then he said simply, "I should like a word with your parents." The conversation that followed took place behind closed doors in the Whitcomb library, but Eleanor felt its weight through the walls. Her father's pacing, her mother's soft laughter, the Duke's calm, measured tones. She did not know the words, only the silence that followed. When the door opened again, Lady Whitcomb emerged, her expression both triumphant and exhausted. "Eleanor," she said quietly, "you are to be married." The world seemed to tilt. "Married?" Eleanor repeated. "To whom?" "To his Grace, the Duke of Wycliffe." Eleanor's breath left her in a sharp whisper. "You sold me." Her mother's smile faltered, then hardened. "We secured your future, and ours. Do not mistake duty for betrayal." "But I don't even know him," Eleanor said, her voice breaking like glass. Lady Whitcomb's tone softened, but only in appearance. "He asked for no dowry. You will live in comfort. You need not concern yourself with children. Consider it mercy." Eleanor turned away, her vision blurring. Outside the tall window, the city lights flickered through mist. She imagined herself trapped within them, another flicker bound to extinguish. Behind her, the Duke's deep voice carried through the doorway. "She deserves honesty, my lady. I offer her respect, not possession." Those words, quiet as they were, reached Eleanor's heart. Still, respect did not feel like freedom. She left the ballroom unnoticed, the laughter behind her fading into the night. The air outside was damp and cold, the scent of coal smoke mixing with rain. Her tears came silently, slipping down her cheeks as she stepped into the courtyard. The carriages were leaving one by one, their wheels cracking over wet stone. She leaned against the balustrade, trying to breathe. A future decided by signatures and silence awaited her. She could not even hate the Duke. He had done nothing cruel, but the arrangement was another cage. Somewhere behind her, a door opened. She turned. The Duke stood at the top of the steps, a dark silhouette against the light. He descended slowly, his boots echoing in the quiet. When he reached her, he removed his gloves with deliberate care, his expression solemn but not unkind. "You need not fear me," he said softly. "I will not pretend this arrangement is fair. Yet I would rather you walk beside me of your own will." Eleanor met his gaze, startled by the gentleness there. "And if I refuse?" His answer was measured, almost weary. "Then I will depart, and your family will face ruin. I offer stability, Lady Eleanor. Not affection, at least not yet. But I do not believe you deserve exile for what is beyond your control." She looked at him then, truly looked. There was sorrow behind his composure, something human that neither pity nor arrogance could mask. A man accustomed to silence, perhaps, rather than cruelty. The wind stirred her skirts, carrying the faint sound of the orchestra from within. A new waltz began, its melody bittersweet. Somewhere deep within her, pride flickered like the smallest flame. She straightened her shoulders. "If I come with you, your grace," she said quietly, "promise me one thing." He inclined his head. "What would you ask of me?" "That I may still be myself, even when the world refuses to see me." A long pause followed. Then he extended his hand. "Then you have my word, Lady Eleanor." For a moment she hesitated, staring at that gloved hand beneath the drizzle. The music swelled behind her, voices rising in laughter she no longer shared. Finally, she placed her fingers in his, the warmth of his skin startling against the cold. He did not smile, but there was something like relief in his eyes. Together they walked toward the waiting carriage. The horses snorted softly, their breath white against the darkness. As the door closed behind her, Eleanor looked once more at the mansion that had been her prison. The light of the ballroom flickered through the rain, distant and dim. The carriage lurched forward, wheels hissing over wet stone. Neither spoke. Outside, London's fog swallowed everything. Inside, silence held a strange kind of promise, uncertain, fragile, but alive. The carriage rolled for hours through the damp English countryside, the rhythm of hooves and rain marking the silence between two strangers bound by circumstance. Eleanor sat with her gloved hands folded in her lap, her thoughts restless. The Duke sat opposite, his posture impeccable, his gaze fixed on the fog-slick window. Now and then, the dim lantern light revealed the faintest flicker of weariness in his eyes, a man accustomed to solitude, burdened not by arrogance but by memory. When at last the wheels slowed before the gates of Wycliffe Manor, Eleanor felt her chest tighten. The iron gates loomed like judgment itself, opening with a groan that seemed to echo her own uncertainty. The manor appeared out of the mist, vast, solemn, and untouched by warmth. Rows of ancient oaks flanked the drive, their branches bare, their shadows long. Lanterns glowed in a few high windows, and somewhere beyond the stables a dog barked once, then fell silent. Servants gathered in the courtyard, their expressions politely curious. As the Duke stepped out, they bowed. When Eleanor followed, their gazes flickered between respect and speculation. She could almost hear the whispers forming. The new Duchess, Baron and bought. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. The grand hall rose into vaulted ceilings, tapestries depicting battles and monarchs staring down with impassive faces. Eleanor trailed the Duke through corridors lined with portraits, his ancestors, stern and noble, each one bearing the same solemn eyes. He stopped before a door near the end of the West Wing and gestured politely. "This will be your room," he said. "I trust it will be to your comfort." She stepped inside. The chamber was elegant yet cold. A great bed draped in pale fabric, a fireplace unlit, the windows veiled in lace. On the dressing table, a single white rose waited in a crystal vase. It felt less like a gesture of affection than an apology. "Thank you, Your Grace," she murmured, unsure of what else to say. "You need not address me so formally when we are alone," he replied quietly. "Adrian will suffice, if you wish." The name lingered between them, too intimate for strangers, too distant for lovers. "Very well," she said softly, though she doubted she would ever grow comfortable using it. He inclined his head and withdrew. When the door closed, the silence pressed upon her like a physical weight. She walked to the window and looked out over the estate. Beyond the gardens stretched fields fading into mist, and beyond that, the river that marked the edge of his lands. It was beautiful, she supposed, but it felt like exile. Days passed in restrained politeness. The Duke was a man of routine. Breakfast precisely at 9, correspondence until noon, then hours spent in the library or among the horses. He spoke little, listened attentively when she did, and never imposed upon her solitude. At dinner, they sat across an expanse of mahogany, the silverware gleaming like frost. He asked if she read poetry, if she rode, if she missed London. Each question felt like a bridge he was uncertain she would cross. Eleanor learned from the housekeeper that the Duke had lost his wife 3 years prior to a fever that swept through the county. The servants spoke of her gently, with reverence. "His Grace has never been the same," the woman said. "The house has been quiet ever since." Eleanor wondered whether she had been brought here to fill silence rather than a heart. In the evenings, she wandered the corridors, trailing her fingers along the carved banisters. Sometimes she would stop in the gallery where sunlight once illuminated portraits of smiling women, now dull beneath the dust. She found herself studying one portrait often, a lady with kind eyes and a music book in her hands. The brushstrokes captured tenderness. Eleanor sensed that this had been the late Duchess. She envied her, not for beauty or rank, but for having known the Duke before grief had carved him hollow. One afternoon, while exploring the library, Eleanor discovered shelves upon shelves of poetry and letters bound in faded ribbon. She ran her fingertips across the spines, pausing at a volume of Wordsworth. When she opened it, she found a pressed forget-me-not between the pages. The Duke entered quietly behind her. "You favor poetry?" he asked. Startled, she turned, the book still in her hands. "Yes, though I rarely find the words I seek." "Words can be traitorous," he said. "They promise clarity but often betray truth." He approached the window, his silhouette outlined by weak sunlight. "I find solace in silence, though it makes poor company." She studied him, tall, dignified, restrained. A man imprisoned by his own composure. "Silence can be cruel," she said softly. He looked at her then, the faintest trace of something, respect, perhaps sorrow, passing across his face. "Indeed," he murmured. The following morning brought a new humiliation. A letter arrived from London, sealed with her mother's crest. Eleanor's heart sank as she broke it open. The handwriting was sharp and urgent. "You must attend to your duties as a wife. Rumors spread that your marriage is but a show. Do not embarrass us further." The words burned her eyes. She folded the letter and tucked it away, her pride trembling. At supper that evening, she ate little. The Duke noticed. "Bad news from London?" "Only reminders," she replied. "Society has a long memory for disgrace." He set down his glass. "Then it is society that is diseased, not you." The gentleness in his tone startled her. "You speak as though you understand." "I understand more than I wish to," he said. "Loss leaves marks unseen." A quiet settled between them, not cold, but heavy with something unspoken. She wanted to ask what he had lost beyond his wife, but the dignity in his expression warned her not to intrude. Later, when she retired, she found a small parcel waiting on her dressing table. Inside was a leather-bound journal embossed with her initials, and beside it, a fountain pen. A note accompanied it in his careful script. "For the thoughts you cannot say aloud." She pressed the paper to her chest, the gesture so unexpected it stole her breath. For the first time, she smiled. Not because she was happy, but because someone had seen her silence and named it gently. In the days that followed, she began to write. Small things at first, memories of her London garden, the ache of forgotten dreams. She wrote of the frost on the window and how it looked like lace, of the sound of his footsteps in the corridor, steady and deliberate. Words became her refuge, the ink a quiet defiance against invisibility. One morning, she carried the journal to the garden. The air was sharp, the sky a wash of pale silver. She knelt by a patch of roses long neglected and began to prune them herself. When the Duke found her there, dirt on her gloves and determination in her eyes, he merely said, "I thought you disliked the cold." "Perhaps I am learning to endure it," she replied. He regarded her for a long moment, then offered his hand to help her rise. "Then Wycliffe is already changing you," he said. "Or perhaps I am changing it," she answered, surprising even herself. For the first time, he smiled. Not a full smile, but enough to warm the chill between them. Then he inclined his head and returned to the house, leaving her with a sense that something unnamed had shifted. As she turned back to the roses, the winter wind carried the faint sound of church bells across the valley. She realized she was no longer counting the days since her marriage, but the one she wished to remember. The house that once felt like exile had begun, ever so slightly, to feel like possibility. Yet she sensed, deep within, that tenderness always comes at the cost of revelation, and his secrets had only begun to stir. The days that followed were cloaked in quiet transformation. The rhythm of Wycliffe Manor softened, reshaping itself around Eleanor's quiet resolve. The servants, once wary of the barren Duchess, began to speak of her with cautious admiration. She no longer hid in corridors or behind embroidery frames. Instead, she spent her mornings tending the winter roses, her afternoons reading aloud in the library, and her evenings by the fire, where the Duke sometimes joined her in companionable silence. Yet, beneath the calm, an unspoken tension grew, a tenderness neither dared name, and a secret she could sense but not yet see. One evening, the sky burned crimson over the western hills as Eleanor entered the drawing room. Adrian stood by the hearth, a folded newspaper in his hand. His expression was unreadable. "It appears," he said evenly, "that London has found a new pastime." He handed her the paper. On the front page, an illustration mocked them both. The Duke's barren bride, a caricature of Eleanor surrounded by wilted roses, while a hollow-eyed Duke looked on. Her breath caught. The humiliation was cruelly familiar, sharper for having followed her even here. Her hands trembled as she set the paper aside. "They will never allow me peace." Adrian's gaze hardened, though his voice remained calm. "It is not you they mock. It is themselves, dressing malice as wit." She gave a bitter laugh. "It is me they despise, your grace. My name, my face, my very being offends their sense of perfection." He approached her slowly, the firelight casting his features in soft shadow. "Then let them rot in their illusions. You owe them nothing." Something in his tone made her meet his eyes. "Do you truly believe that? Or are you simply skilled at pretending indifference?" His composure faltered for the briefest moment. "Pretending," he said quietly, "has long been my only means of survival." The honesty in his voice silenced her. The tension that had hovered between them for weeks now shifted, fragile but electric. He looked as though he might say more, but instead turned toward the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "Tomorrow, we ride," he said. "There is a place I wish to show you." The next morning dawned pale and cold, the countryside veiled in mist. Eleanor had not ridden since her London days, but the Duke's horseman prepared a gentle mare for her, chestnut and calm. They rode in near silence along a narrow trail that wound through frost-dusted fields. The air smelled of pine and earth, and for a while, the stillness between them felt almost peaceful. At last, they reached a clearing overlooking the river. There, half hidden by ivy and thyme, stood the ruins of an old chapel. "This was my mother's," Adrian said, dismounting. "She loved this place. Said it was built for truth, not ceremony." He walked to a crumbling archway, his hand tracing the stone. "I brought her here before she died. She asked me to promise that I would never marry for duty." Eleanor followed, her steps slow on the uneven ground. "And yet you did," she said softly. He turned toward her, his gaze steady. "No, I married for mercy." The words hung between them, stark and aching. She searched his face for cruelty and found none. "Mercy, you were treated unjustly," he said, "condemned by a world too small to see worth beyond inheritance. I thought perhaps I could offer sanctuary. What I did not expect," he hesitated. "What I did not expect was that I would begin to care." Her pulse quickened. "You pity me?" "No," he said firmly. "I respect you, and that is rarer than pity, I assure you." She looked away, the wind catching a loose strand of her hair. "Respect is not love." "No," he agreed, "but it is the soil where love might grow, if one is patient." They stood in silence, the river murmuring below. Eleanor felt her defenses waver. For months, she had armored herself against compassion, fearing it would expose her weakness. Yet now, in this forgotten chapel, she felt something shift, a fragile recognition of kindred pain. When they returned to the manor, the air between them had changed. At dinner, conversation flowed more easily. He asked about her childhood, her favorite books, the first flower she ever planted. She found herself laughing softly, surprised by the sound. Later, he poured her tea himself, an act so simple it nearly undid her. That night, sleep eluded her. The newspaper still lay folded on her bedside table, its cruel drawing hidden beneath the Duke's note. Asterisk for the thoughts you cannot say aloud. Asterisk. She rose, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and made her way to the music room. The piano waited in silence. She hesitated, then began to play, slowly, haltingly, the melody of a waltz she had once danced to in London before her world collapsed. Halfway through, she sensed him before she saw him. Adrian stood at the doorway, the faintest smile softening his expression. "I did not know you played," he said. "Nor did I," she replied, her fingers trembling over the keys. "It seems I have remembered how." He crossed the room quietly. "You should never have forgotten." She turned toward him, the fire casting gold along his face. "You speak as though music were a duty." "It is not duty," he said. "It is proof that life persists even after silence claims it." Their eyes met, and something unguarded passed between them. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, the room filled with the sound of her breathing. He took a slow step closer. "Eleanor," he said, her name sounding less like a title and more like a confession. Her throat tightened. "Why did you truly marry me, Adrian? Not the words you told my parents, but the truth." He drew in a long breath. "Because I knew what was to lose everything you were told to find you. My wife, my child, gone within hours." And then the whispers began, that I was cursed, unfit for lineage. I withdrew before society could devour me. When I learned of your plight, I saw in you the same cruelty I once endured. I thought perhaps, in giving you freedom, I might remember my own humanity. Eleanor's eyes shimmered. "And have you?" He looked at her then, his voice low. "Not until now." The world seemed to narrow to the space between them. The soft hum of the fire, the faint scent of roses lingering in the air. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but deliberate. "I didn't marry you for what the world demands," he said quietly. "I married you for what my heart remembered." Her breath caught. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, with careful grace, he lifted her hand and pressed his lips to it. Not in ownership, but reverence. The gesture undid her completely. She had not realized how starved she was for tenderness until it was offered freely. When he stepped back, she could not find words. The piano still whispered its last note, fading into stillness. "Good night, Eleanor," he said softly, his voice almost breaking on her name. As he turned to leave, she whispered after him, "Good night, Adrian." He paused at the door, his shoulders easing, as though her words alone had lifted years from him. When he disappeared down the corridor, she stood for a long time, her hands still tingling where his lips had brushed. The fire crackled softly, and for the first time since her marriage, she felt the fragile warmth of hope. Yet somewhere beneath that warmth lingered a question, whether love, once born from mercy, could ever survive truth. Spring came early that year, painting Wickless Gardens in tender green and silver dew. The air carried the scent of rebirth, and with it came a quiet transformation within the manor walls. Eleanor's laughter, once timid, now echoed through the corridors, and even the old steward smiled more often than before. But beneath that newfound peace lay a truth unspoken, a truth Eleanor both longed for and feared. Though affection had bloomed between her and Adrian, the memory of her past rejection shadowed every tender glance. Love, she thought, was a fragile thing when built upon broken worth. One afternoon, she found Adrian in the greenhouse, kneeling among the climbing roses. His sleeves were rolled, his hands streaked with earth. "Your Grace," she said with a soft smile, "I did not expect to find you here." He looked up, amusement flickering in his eyes. "And yet here I am, your husband, conquered by your flowers." She laughed quietly. "They seem to obey you better than they do me." He rose, brushing soil from his gloves. "Only because they fear your beauty outshines theirs." The words slipped from him before he could stop them. For a moment, silence hung between them, charged, intimate, alive. Then he turned away, his voice lower. "Forgive me. I speak too plainly." Eleanor's heart beat unevenly. "No," she said softly. "You speak honestly. Few men in my life ever have." He met her gaze, and something in his expression changed. "Then perhaps honesty is what we both need." He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small, folded letter. "This arrived from London this morning." Her breath caught when she saw the seal, her family's crest. She unfolded it with trembling fingers, her eyes scanning the words. Her mother's hand, elegant but cold, begged for money, lamenting the scandal of Eleanor's pitiful union and warning that society would never forget her shame. No inquiry about her health, no kindness, only greed, disguised as concern. When she finished, her hand fell to her side. "Even now," she whispered, "they see me as their burden to sell." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You owe them nothing. They are still my blood." "Blood can poison as easily as it can sustain," he said sharply, then softened. "Eleanor, if they seek to use you again, I will not allow it." Tears gathered in her eyes. "You speak as though you care." "I do," he said simply. "More than I should, perhaps. But I do." The honesty of his confession startled her more than his touch ever could. "Then why do you hold back?" she asked. "You speak of care, yet your heart is locked away, guarded as though love were a trespass." He exhaled, looking toward the glass ceiling streaked with sunlight. "Because every person I have loved has been taken from me. My first wife died believing she had failed me, when in truth it was I who failed her. I could not bear to make that mistake again." Eleanor's voice broke through the hush. "Then let this be different. Let neither of us live haunted by what the world took." For a moment, he only looked at her, as though weighing the cost of surrender. Then, with quiet resolve, he said, "Come with me." They led her through the garden path to the old chapel they had visited months before. Spring vines had begun to reclaim its stones, weaving pale blossoms through its ruins. In the center, where once an altar had stood, a new marble bench gleamed. Upon it lay a small wooden box. He opened it, revealing a delicate silver locket. Inside was a miniature painting, not of his late wife, but of Eleanor herself, her likeness captured with tenderness. Her hand flew to her mouth. "You had this made?" He nodded. "It was painted from memory. I feared I might forget the light in your eyes when you smile." Her breath trembled. "Why show me this now?" "Because," he said, voice low and steady, "I no longer wish to live half a life. I married you to give you freedom, but it is I who found it through you, She stepped closer, her eyes shimmering. "And what do you want now, Adrian?" He met her gaze, unflinching. "You, not out of mercy, not out of loneliness. Simply because you're the only person who makes me believe I am still capable of love." For a long, trembling moment, neither spoke. Then Eleanor reached for the locket, her fingers brushing his. "You've given me what I thought I would never have again," she said softly. "Not just love, but choice." He drew a slow breath, as though her words had undone the last of his restraint. "Then choose, Eleanor. Choose to stay, not because you are bound to me, but because you wish to." Her tears slipped silently down her cheeks. "I choose you," she whispered, "in this life and whatever comes after." He took her hand, pressed it to his chest. "Then the rest of the world may vanish for all I care." The chapel bells from the village began to toll faintly in the distance, their echoes carried by the wind. It was as though the world itself bore witness to their quiet vow. Days turned into weeks, and the scandal in London faded like smoke. The cruel caricature was replaced by whispers of admiration. The Duke and Duchess of Wycliffe, whose marriage defied society's measure of worth. Guests who once mocked her now sought her grace. Men who had dismissed her now bowed in respect. But Eleanor no longer needed their approval. She had found her dignity not in titles, but in love freely given. One evening, as twilight melted into the scent of rain, Adrian found her standing by the balcony. She was watching the horizon, her hair caught in the wind. "You're quiet," he said. "Only thinking," she replied, "of how strange it is that peace feels so loud when one has lived in silence for so long." He smiled faintly. "And what does peace say to you now?" She turned toward him, her eyes alight. "That perhaps I was never broken, only waiting for someone who could see me whole." He stepped closer, slipping his arm around her waist. "Then I will spend the rest of my days proving that truth." Outside, thunder rumbled softly, followed by a sudden, gentle rain. Instead of retreating, Eleanor lifted her face to the sky, letting the drops fall freely. Adrian joined her, his laughter deep and unguarded. The world seemed to dissolve in a silver mist, two souls reborn beneath the storm. When the rain eased, he caught her hand again, turning it palm up. "Do you still believe fate was cruel?" he asked. She smiled through tears. "No, it was simply patient." He brushed a kiss against her forehead, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then let us live without fear of what it once took." In the garden below, roses stirred in the wind, their petals gleaming with rain. The manor windows glowed like lanterns in the dusk. Within them, laughter and candlelight flickered together, as if the walls themselves had learned to breathe again. And as night settled softly over Wycliffe, Eleanor rested her head against Adrian's shoulder, knowing that love, true love, had not come to rescue her, but to remind her she had always been enough.